Here we are. We're live. Yay! So
Yay.
hello, everybody. Today I am with Colleen Dietrich Sisson. I want to say it like that. Sisson.
That's perfect.
Yeah? Okay.
Yes.
So I am with Colleen. I usually just sort of chit chat a little bit for the first couple minutes, only because it takes time for people to come and join us and watch, and also just to get us sorted and settled. We cannot start any of these conversations. Oh, wait, I should tell you what we're doing. It's been a long time, folks. My name remains Laura May Lindo. I am the Member of Provincial Parliament for Kitchener Centre. And this is People in My Hood. 'Tis a philosophical podcast. And so we are live today, which is an interesting day to be live. For those that have not heard me tell you before, I am a single mommy. And so while I am live today, I am also half listening to children that are in various parts of my home online, because there is virtual learning happening at this exact moment, as many of you know. With that being the case, before we jump into our conversation today, I just wanted to begin in the right way. So I'm hosting this podcast from my home in Kitchener. This land has been held down, cared for, loved, and stewarded by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral people. I have been taught that finding out the land that you are on is the easy part. 'Tis something you can Google. But the more difficult part, and I'm not even going to call it difficult, the work, the real work, the part that actually helps us to walk good, as my people say, but the part that helps us to actually navigate our path towards reconciliation is to make a solid connection between the reality that you are on stolen land and the conversation that you're about to have. And today we are talking about education. Today we are talking about some of the gaps in our social fabric that should have allowed a return to school to happen in a way that held the most vulnerable children with care, love, and support. But some of those gaps remained gaps even as we walked into this. And I connect that to the realities that many First Peoples have spoken to us about being forgotten, about their needs not being met, about their the requirements that they have to hold their communities with care in a way that is meaningful to them, that have been ignored by the traditional school system. And the fact that that pushes so many people back, which means when we start to talk about ways to better the system or to move past this pandemic, there are groups of community members, like Indigenous community members, who were far, far behind to begin with, because we never provided them with the love, care, and support that they deserved in the system, that we also have to take into consideration when we are rebuilding ourselves, our children, our families, our communities post-COVID, which we will get to, my friends. It doesn't feel like it always, but I swear we will get there. So with that, I want to introduce somebody in my hood, Colleen. Hi, Colleen. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you. It's a beautiful Friday, sunny morning outside.
It is so nice outside.
It is.
So Colleen and I met. The interesting thing about this podcast is that we're reaching out to people that I have met over the time that I've been a member of provincial parliament. And I've met different people for different reasons. And Colleen and I met, I would say that we really met in was it the second wave? But I don't know, all the waves, so many waves. But I think it was the second wave when we had to have some real talk about what it meant when we said school closures. Because everybody thought all the schools were closed, all the kids were at home, all the educators were online, when in reality, things were happening in the schools. And Colleen reached out to me, and she and I would argue that we hit it off. Would you argue that we hit it off, Colleen?
I agree, we hit it off.
We hit it off, which I sometimes do when I'm rabble rousing. But I think we hit it off. And I think part of why we hit it off was because there was some real talk. And so for those that don't know, Colleen is the president of the Educational Assistance Association. And we often talk about education workers. That language has sort of been introduce so that we're talking about the bigger ecosystem that exists in the school. We often talk about educators, etc. And then sometimes we'll say something about an EA and people don't quite know what we're talking about, but they know they're part of the system. And so I enjoyed having a conversation with Colleen because it was a moment where there were real examples of how much the EAs carry inside of the school and how forgotten they often are and how forgotten that work often is. So with that being the case, I just want to first say thank you, Colleen, for joining me today. I really, really appreciate it. And what I do in this podcast is I start off, like, it's all conversational and kind of chill. So I start off just throwing it over to you and asking you where you think the gap is, or gaps, there might be more than one, in the system that's making things difficult for you, for the EAs that you represent, for the EAs doing all of this amazing work in the school. So right over to you, Colleen.
Okay, so Laura May, I don't want to forget that I also represent child and youth workers.
Oh.
So our schools include child and youth workers and educational assistants, all who are frontline workers working with our most vulnerable students. So where do I see the gap in the system? I'd have to say that it starts at the top with the ministry. We have been advocating with the ministry for 2 years now, specifically in the recent N95 case where, we've been saying our members need N95s for 2 years. Every month we go to meetings, we bring this back up as a huge health and safety concern. We show them information that we get from OCAW and various systems of groups that are doing research on these concerns, and N95s have always been the superior PPE, and it's fallen on deaf ears. Every time we bring up a concern, the people at the meeting say, oh, we'll take it back, we'll take it back. I mean, I actually went so far as to say one time, why don't we just have Minister Lecce here so he can answer our questions? Because things go back, and where are they put? Are they put on a pile? I don't know. I personally reached out to Minister Lecce and Doug Ford, and honestly, of course, they haven't called me back. No surprise. Neither have they, responded personally. Their office always does, but it always feels like, it's being ignored, and extremely frustrating because our members who are frontline workers, who are mandated in classrooms, specifically now, as you had mentioned, Laura May, last round when the schools were closed, the general population, they thought every school was closed, every student was at home, and they didn't know that. So last year I was trying to let the public know that, yes, our members are in schools, our members are servicing the most vulnerable students. And it's a really tough position to be in. I find myself right now, we're back again, the ministry at the last second announced that, we're going to be opening schools to the most vulnerable students. Of course, when they're doing these, these huge broadcasts to the general population, nothing's mentioned about our special needs kids. Nothing's mentioned about the educational assistants or child and youth workers going back into schools. And that's a huge concern to me. So I think the communication overall that's been going out by the Doug Ford government has not been clear. I think that our members, as well as teachers, should be, we should be recognized right up front that we are working in schools, that we are there with our students. Now, I have to say, our members, all of our members and teachers as well, they are so dedicated to the well-being of all students, including our most vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And I totally understand why a parent would need, especially a single parent, and anybody else would need and want their child to be in school. I have to tell you, it really scares me, though, with the numbers that we have right now being so astronomically high, and we don't even know what the real numbers are because all the reasons we know with the testing not happening. Mm-hmm. It scares me to think that our children are going onto buses. They're transported from buses to schools, then they're transported from schools to buses, and then they're, also, participating in other programs that we don't know about. So they are going to different places and being around different people. And I have a huge concern for our students because we know how easy it is to pass. And now we know that the masks all this time have been so inferior. And on that note, masks are supposed to be in schools by Monday. I'm hearing that they are dwindling in. I'm getting members from schools are reaching out to me, but right now, vast majority, they don't have them. We were supposed to open on Wednesday, but our board and all of the union presidents and groups pushed to wait until we knew that those N95s would be in place and other safety measures. So kudos to our board for holding off and pressing pause, because I know other school boards have opened up without the proper PPE there. So I have to say, in answer to your question, it's a long one. I feel, the biggest gap in this system is that the ministry is not providing enough time for us to follow through. They're also not listening to the frontline workers at hand. That's my biggest comment.
Well, listen, first off, I just want to say thank you for all of the advocacy that you are doing, and a big shout out to the EAs and CYWs who are advocating as well, because what I remember, it stands out as one of the biggest challenges that our office had to face during one of those last waves when the schools had closed. I was getting individual emails from CYWs and EAs who were documenting for me what was happening to them, and the level of anxiety and stress that they were under. There was and you can correct me if I'm incorrect, but there was this sense on the ground that they didn't want to be in schools. But all of these documents I was receiving from these educators was that they wanted to be in school, but they wanted to be safe. And they were particularly concerned because they were working with really vulnerable students. And so if they didn't have PPE, these students would be unsafe. And that was where the tension was coming. And so it was, we ended up, just in case anybody's wondering what we did, we took all of these emails that we were getting. We asked permission from anybody who was willing to have their name assigned to it, or we would take off the name if they didn't want to. Vast majority were okay with it. Put it into a major, huge Google Doc. Shout out to Julie in my office who helped us to make that happen. And we sent a couple letters, with a link to the Google Doc to the minister, so that he could take a look at what was happening on the front lines. And so I just want to say thank you for the advocacy from those that are on the ground, because not only are you holding our kids to the best of your ability, but you're doing the advocacy to try and ensure that they're safe, when the narrative that's coming out from government is that everything is just fine.
Exactly.
And
may I ask you, Laura May, what was the response you received from the ministry?
I received no response from the ministry.
Yeah, and considering your position, that is really disrespectful. I mean, I find that we're all being disrespected. I think that if we, the frontline workers, are being asked to go in, if you are advocating for us and there's no response from the ministry, that's just another thing that I feel is a huge gap. I mean, if we are the frontline workers, why are they not listening to us? Why are they not taking our professional expertise into consideration? That's a kick in the head. And here you've taken it another step forward. We advocated that our members reach out to you. You send this off and you hear crickets. And that's just that. I would call that disrespect. I know everybody's busy. I know the ministry's busy. But still, there needs to be a response, even if it's a week later, 2 weeks later, and crickets. So,
oftentimes what does happen is the quote unquote response is the next decision or the next set of decisions that comes out in the media. And so there seems to be a need for us to make it more and more clear to government that, like, I shouldn't be hanging out on Twitter to find out what's going to happen to me next.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Like, I should just be able to believe that somebody will speak to me. And it's in that back and forth, in that dialogue, that respectful dialogue, that you get to find out if the decision that you're making is actually going to meet the needs that I have.
Exactly.
And that piece missing is hugely detrimental. But it does remind me of something that I realized quite early on. After being elected, there's been a lot of advocacy from disabilities advocates who have said that this particular government isn't paying attention to people with disabilities, and they're not taking it seriously. And so we are starting to be able to connect the dots in very tangible ways. It's not nuanced, it's just clearly missing. when we think about what's happening in the housing crisis, we see the same thing. I get messages from people that are saying, okay, great, invest a bunch of money in affordable homes, but if they're not accessible, how am I supposed to live there? And then we're doing advocacy, and we realize that if there is a wait list of 10 years for an affordable home, if you have a disability, you're looking at another X amount of years for a home that would come for you, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I have children with disabilities as well, and back in the day, 10 years ago, the waiting list was like 3, 4, or 5 years long. Now it's 10 plus years to get any kind of housing.
It
And
doesn't make
it's very disheartening, very
yeah.
disheartening.
And so now we see the same kind of thing happen when it comes to education, where if a decision is being made for a bunch of students without talking to any of the people that are working with those students, then how do we know that those needs are being met? And what we are hearing is that the needs are not being met, which leads me to my second question, which is just generally, what does leadership look like to address this gap? So I know you started to speak a little bit about what that respectful conversation would look like with the ministry, or what that relationship would look like with the ministry, or how those decisions would be made. But I think it's important for us to speak into being what we want. And so what would leadership in this area look like that would make you feel confident that the people that you represent are actually being heard?
Well, I mean, it might have sounded a little flip to say have Minister Lecce at our ministry meetings, but quite honestly, if he's the ultimate decision maker and Doug Ford, why are we talking to all these other people in these groups that are basically paying lip service to what's going on? I mean, they can't make the decisions. They're not in that position of power, so to speak, and they're just carrying information back, and it just gets lost. It gets lost. And I think that I would like to see that they reach out to, heads of unions, heads of, to find out what's really going on the front line. What are the concerns? I mean, honestly, our schools are getting information eventually through the ministry. I get it right away because I'm at those tables.
Yeah.
But honestly, it always looks like that it's our school board that's messing things up, and it's not. I mean, I have to constantly say to our members, the school board did not make this decision. I didn't make this decision, because I get members saying, why are we not fighting for our rights? Well, quite honestly, we are fighting for our rights, but we're talking third hand, right? We're trying. We're right there at those tables. We're not getting the answers directly. And then eventually something comes out. But I mean, we need more people involved here. There was something I was going to say, and I just wanted to, I've lost my train of thought on it, but I know what it is. We could sit at a ministry meeting. We will ask all of the questions, and they'll say, we'll get back to it. 10 minutes later, I'm not kidding you, how many times it's happened, 10 minutes to an hour later, ministry puts out a bulletin about what's happening. And we just asked all those questions. We are constantly saying, we are happy to meet and discuss this. We are happy to meet and discuss this. But they're not interested in talking to us ahead of time. And then they put things out that are all, for lack of a better word, messed up, or not very clear, or confusing, or not even safe. And now that's after the fact. And we're all trying to deal with the fallout of bad decisions and bad leadership.
Yeah.
Right. And even the people at the ministry table will say, I'm sorry, we didn't get that information, because we'll say at the end of almost every meeting, is there anything you'd like to share? Will there be a memo coming out from the ministry? No, we have nothing. So they don't even give the courtesy of the people that sit at the tables with us to let them know what's going on.
So they, Colleen, one sec.
Mama,
certainly.
I need help getting through my password.
Okay, so do you want to bring me the computer? Just hand me the computer. Hello, folks. This is Real Life with MPP Lindo, who, as a single mommy, is navigating virtual learning. So,
and on that note, Laura May, I have to say, we have so many single parents within our group as well. And here you are continuing on with your business, advocating for us. Our members are, carrying along with their business too. And they're dealing with young children at home. A lot of people are single moms. And how do we get things in place so quickly, so our kids can be looked after, plus look after the students' needs and so on. it's a tough
You put your
situation
password
for
in.
everybody.
Oh yeah, it's very, very difficult. And you know what? As much as I sort of I make light of it to the best of my ability, but the reality is it is quite stressful for an educator whose goal is to be professional, to provide the support to their students, etc., to feel so torn, right?
Yeah.
Like you have your kid literally sitting 2 steps away from you while you are trying to teach your class. And there are moments where we're able to juggle it. And if people that know me know that I make fun of all sorts of things to try and keep it light. But the reality is, I have a 6-year-old who's trying to like get out of grade 1. And
Exactly.
as a mommy, I want to be able to help them. But as a community leader and an advocate, I have to also be doing this. And
Yeah.
I know that the educators on the other side of that, in that Google Classroom, are having those same struggles, right? Um,
Absolutely.
it is not easy, and it is the reason why we ask for the ministry and the government and whoever the decision makers actually are to be present with us to have some real talk.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that they understand that when you throw everything at, well, we'll just go virtual, that is not easy. Even small things like when they during one of the waves, and they shut, I think it was the first one when they shut the schools down, maybe the second, and then they decided, oh, guess what, when we do shut down now, because we've gone through this pandemic, if we do have to have a snow day, let's make that school too. Like there's no concept of what that actually means for people who have to juggle work and teaching and parenting, etc., etc. I'm going into a rant. We're in rant mode. This is the rant portion of the philosophical podcast, People in My Hood. We always get in there somewhere. At some point, MPP Lindo starts to rant.
Hey, I get it. I do my own rant sometimes too. People listen to me and they're very polite for the most time. I mean, ultimately, the question you'd ask me is what does leadership look like in
Yeah.
in this area? I mean, the kind of leadership I'd like to see is leadership where all the leaders are consulted. All the leaders
Yeah.
are part of figuring out what we're going to do, not just the ministry. I'm not saying they don't know exactly what's going in school, but they don't actually know what's going on in a lot of schools. I mean, they're not sitting there with the kids, sitting with them, working with them, and working with their needs and everything. But honestly, there's got to be a better way for all of us, all the leaders, to come together and make decisions, and good decisions and sound decisions, and then give us time to follow through. So again, kudos, I'll say to our board. We were supposed to be back in school on Wednesday, but we weren't ready. And they did push it off to Monday. We're still scrambling. We're still waiting on, N95s. So, I mean, I have to say our board, I will just say I find our board has been doing a fantastic job. It's just the leadership, this hierarchy of leadership that says, okay, we're deciding to do this now. And then it's left to the boards to scramble and figure out how are we going to put everything into place. Like i.e. boards need to consult with local health units. Boards need to do this. I mean, my God, the announcement comes out one day and we're supposed to be back in school in a couple of days. It's just, I understand and I totally believe that our kids need to be in school and it's the best place for them. I really do. But we need the time to put things in place. The way things have been going by our government is putting most of our staff into a state of panic, frustration. This round, a lot of fear with the numbers being so high. I mean, people are not doing well. And it just keeps continuing. And the other piece that I'm sure you've heard about, fail to fill. I mean, right now I'm hearing from members who are in quarantine. Teachers are in quarantine. What's going to happen on Monday is a big concern for me. We already had so many of our own staff off. Before the school year ended, we saw the numbers rising exponentially before the holidays, and yet everything was last minute again. Yeah, and I know there's always the, oh, let's hope it gets better. Let's hope it gets better. But if you look at the trends in Europe and how things have escalated, they were going up, up, up. We follow their trends. We're still on the upward climb. So why didn't they make that decision sooner? Like maybe a week into the holiday, at least let's get this planning happening now and not waiting. So.
Well, and I would add that we've had, listen, I love our rants. I would add that we've had 4 waves to prepare ourselves 4 waves to explain to each other what preventative measures need to be in place, 4 waves to ensure that we have everything that we can think of as a safeguard in the school, so that when something that we didn't think of happens, at least our baseline isn't as far down as it was that very first time that COVID hit. And I think that that's the part of that is so frustrating for many of us outside of government, who are part of this. I'll speak for myself as part of the establishment, as an elected official, but not on the government side of this equation. It is frustrating to see all of the lessons that seem to be ignored. Before the pandemic, we were fighting with the whole fix our schools and invest in the ventilation systems and ensuring that our classrooms were safe, et cetera, et cetera. Before that, we were talking about the needs for EAs and CYWs in terms of pay wages and the fact that they're so underwaged comparatively, et cetera, et cetera. Like, we're fighting for all of these things. But now when we're in a state of emergency and a pandemic and we needed all of that stuff to be fixed so we'd be better able to cope, we didn't have it fixed. And so that part to me is really frustrating. And as I shift us into the third, my final question, which is the part where I start to get, the same old MPP Lindo that everybody knows and loves, the one that likes to speak positivity into the universe. I just wanted to take a second to pause on the notion of leadership. And especially, I think schools are a wonderful space to think this one through, because it is a philosophical podcast, folks. Leaders are found in all sorts of different spaces. And what makes them a leader is that they have different knowledge. So there are some leaders who are the ones who are front facing with the students, who have a better sense of what's happening with the students in school, and they can provide us with more insight into the mental health supports that are needed for these kids, or how fearful kids might be and how that's impacting their academic progress. We've got other leaders in the system whose literal focus and goal is to make sure that the workers inside of our education system are supported, cared for, and provided with what they need to be safe. Their focus is not on the kids, but on the people the adults that are with those kids. At the ministry level, they're focused on other things, that they're focused on making sure the curriculum is okay, making sure that we're pivoting in the way that we need, making sure that academic progress in Ontario, not just in a particular board, is up to par and up to snuff with other areas, so that people have other places that they can go once they graduate. And the government has a different kind of focus because they're looking at education across the entire province, but they also have to think about budgeting for education beside healthcare, beside employment initiatives and small businesses and long-term care and older adults, et cetera. And Indigenous communities, they should be thinking about that. They don't think about it far enough. So I'm just going to say that one twice. Indigenous communities, because everybody has a part to play in that, in ensuring that they're held with care, support, et cetera. If, when we're thinking about how we move forward, we don't recognize the expertise that each of those sets of leaders has and why it's important to have them at the table, I feel like we will go nowhere. As my mummy says, you will go nowhere quickly, right?
Well, exactly. Sometimes it feels like we're going backwards. I mean, I know we're almost out of time, but I do have to reiterate what you said several lines ago. Our members are so underpaid. And in some regards, the hourly wage is fairly decent, but we don't have the hours. I mean, a lot of our members on average are working maybe 20 hours a week, piecemeal terms on top of terms. We need full jobs. Our members need to be having a living. And they're not. A lot of our members are working at a poverty wage. We've had, besides the 1% we had for a while, we are so far down the totem pole. I mean, with everything going on, with prices going up, everything's going up now because of the pandemic. I mean, we don't have a living wage, and we are losing members on a regular basis because the COVID experience has just been wearing everybody out, and everybody else was already feeling unheard before that. And like you said, everything that we talked about at the tables before the pandemic has been sitting in a little pile waiting for this to be over. And our group keeps on saying, we want to set up a to talk about everything that hasn't been spoken about. And it's not happening. So, I mean, I do want to put it out there that our frontline workers, EAs and CYWs, are so dedicated to this job to the point where they work so many hours overtime and don't get paid to look after our students' need. That needs to change.
So with that, I'm going to ask the last question. And this is the part where I say we need to get creative and start dreaming real big. But imagine that we're in a place where all of the issues that you've raised have been addressed, that they've been addressed in the best way possible, that everything is actually awesome, not just like fake awesome, but like for realsies. What would that look like? Like, what would that look like?
Awesome in my world for our members would be that our members are all having a living wage, that they're working, minimum 35 hours a week, if not 40. We all do planning time, and they say we need to work within the students' hours being at school. Well, with the amount of behavior we deal with, incident reports, planning, EAs and CYWs do all of that. We have no planning time. I can see our days would be full if we had 35 or 40 hours, preparing at the beginning of the school, clearing things up at the end of the school, wrapping everything up as far as if there's been incidents or behaviors. Everything is done and finished at the end of the day, and we start anew. That's a philosophy, no matter what happens, is start brand new the next day with your child, your children, your students. But the fact is there's so many things that are lingering from the day before, the week before, the month before that have not been resolved because we don't have the time to do it. Yeah. So in my ideal world, our staff would be protected. They'd be working in classrooms with students with the the correct amount of staff in schools to support these students' needs, because in a lot of cases, there's not enough staff. We'd be working 35 to 40 hours, being able to support our families and having a living wage, and actually being able to go home at the end of the day and say, hey, I did a great job today. I love my job and happy to go back to work the next morning. And I can tell you that's not the case. It hasn't been the case for a long time. And with COVID, not happening. That's my vision.
Listen, thank you, Colleen, for putting that vision into the universe. I'm going to take half a second to just give another shout out and put some more love into the universe around the EAs and CYWs who are doing everything within their power to support our kids despite all of the gaps in all of the systems, etc. Please, please, please put some love into the universe for these workers in our schools, in the fabric of our schools, because I think we have to work with each other to ensure that we build the kind of educational network and educational system that we want. And part of that is dreaming big. Which, can I just tell you, a living wage shouldn't be a big dream. Like, what is happening here? But anyway,
yeah,
exactly. That's another rant for another day.
Well, the needs aren't going away. They're just getting bigger. And we need to follow them as we go along. We need to work on them on a daily basis. And that's coming from the top down. It really is. We need the support from the government.
Yep. Well, listen, I'm with you. We're going to keep fighting. I am hoping that folks enjoyed sharing, partaking in this conversation. People in My Hood, a philosophical podcast. Colleen, thank you for everything that you do. Shout out to you. Shout out to Zara, who's in the back end trying to pretend like I'm not going to say their name online. Zara. And to all of you, stay safe. We're going to keep fighting, and big love to all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Laura May. Bye.
No worries. Bye.
Keep well.
Uh-oh. And